Lawyers of Reddit, what's the stupidest case you've been asked to take on, and did you? I'm a personal injury lawyer in the UK. I took a call from a potential client that had fallen down the stairs in her own home. She had tripped over her own cat. She told me she wanted to sue the local authorities, as her home was owned by the council and she was not allowed to keep pets as part of her lease. She claimed that when the house was inspected, she was not told to get rid of the cat. It was therefore the council's fault that she fell down the stairs. We didn't take the case on. Story 2. I dealt with a guy once who wanted me to take on his road traffic accident PI claim. He had written a poem in Yoruba about the accident. He refused to tell me anything about his case until he's read the whole thing in Yoruba. Among other problems, I can't speak any frickin' Yoruba. As in, not one word. As in, that day was the first time I had ever heard of the Yoruba language. I'm not even from a part of the world where I might readily be mistaken for someone who speaks Yoruba. It's a West African language and I am really obviously not from a West African background. I try to explain this to the guy who becomes very agitated and insists that he must read out his poem in Yoruba. I give up and tell him to get on with it so we can talk about his claim. He does, and it takes him nearly 20 minutes to finish. Anyway, after he's done, he finishes and sits back with a big smile and says that he's certain I will take on his case now. I begin to ask him some questions about his case, but he refuses to answer. He says that this poem, in Yoruba, is everything I need to know about his case. Basically, I tell him to screw off and stop wasting my time. He does, but not before standing around outside my office for an hour or so reading out his poem to no one in particular over and over again. In Yoruba. Maybe I'm uncultured, but I also have never heard of Yoruba before. I'm probably not even saying it right. I am curious behind this man's thought process, though. Did he think the poem would be that moving? What was in the poem? What does it talk about? All mysteries. Story 3. I was working in a law firm and got a call from reception advising that someone had arrived needing some intellectual property advice. I arrived at reception to find a clearly disturbed woman with a persistent facial twitch and a small wheeled suitcase. I took her to a conference room to discuss, making sure I kept a good line of sight to reception. She put the suitcase on the table and opened it to reveal a stack of thousands of handwritten pages and one half of a pair of scissors. So I guess a scissor? She explained that she had written a manuscript about how the city council gave her schizophrenia and hepatitis, and aliens stole her pet, and that it was all part of a bigger conspiracy involving the army and the Illuminati. She was worried that our local newspaper was going to steal her thoughts and publish her manuscript without her consent, and wanted to register the copyright in her manuscript. We then had a perfectly rational and reasonable discussion about copyright laws. I explained that in our jurisdiction she didn't need to register it, and that she had rights as an author automatically on creation of the work. I told her the most useful thing she could do was ensure she had evidence of her creative work, and that she should send a digital copy to herself and a friend, and also leave a copy with a friend. That way, if it was published without her consent, she could prove it was her work. We spoke for nearly an hour, she thanked me, and then left. She got free legal advice, and I didn't get stabbed with a scissor. I hope she found the help she needs. Huge shout out to OP for handling this really well. When someone does have delusions like these, it is the safest and best thing most of the time to just play along, especially in a matter where a scissor is involved. A scissor, huh? I guess so. Does that mean one pant leg is... Story 4. I never did much criminal defense, but a man, who we'll call Dennis, came into my office with a driving while intoxicated charge and an aggravated unlicensed operation of a motor vehicle charge, both misdemeanors. Dennis swore up and down and sideways that he 1. Doesn't drink and was not intoxicated. 2. Never drove the vehicle. And 3. He has a valid driver's license. I give Dennis the names of some local criminal defense and DWI attorneys and suggest he try them out. Dennis refuses, saying, I'm the lawyer he wants. In hindsight, I should have realized that he probably had already gone to these other attorneys, and only came to me after they refused to take his case. I charged the guy $200 for an intake and record review fee and contact the local court, police station, and district attorney's office for information and paperwork. I find out that this guy not only blew a .18 on the breathalyzer, but the cops did a blood test on him after he kept insisting he wasn't drunk. The blood test came back with a .22 BAC. As for driving, the separate squad cars witnessed Dennis's vehicle run over a mailbox and drive off. He was followed and pulled over on the block. Per the police report, Dennis was the only person in the car and was in the driver's seat with a seatbelt on. Oh, and I tracked down his license through the DMV, and it expired 3 years ago and was suspended for 2 years prior to that. I called Dennis back into my office and told him he didn't have a case. Dennis admitted that he probably had been drunk, but he wasn't aware he had been drinking. His son must have put Fireball whiskey in his green tea, and he didn't realize that there was whiskey in his green tea because he was eating red-hot cinnamon candies and had a cold/stuffy nose. Anyway, Dennis retains me, but only after I put a clause on his engagement agreement stating I explained his low chance at trial and he understood there was no guarantee of a win. I take the case to trial and, of course, we lose. I was hoping to convince Dennis to take one of the plea offers given to us in advance, but no, absolutely not. Dennis was sure the judge would understand. Dennis wanted a bench trial, not a jury trial. I made him sign another document later on that said he understood the difference between a bench and jury trial and he was opting for the bench trial. He was just really hoping he would be found not guilty and everyone would move on. He was sorely disappointed, but only got probation after trial. I think the judge was taking pity on me more than Dennis. Dennis later sued me for his retainer because I didn't adequately defend him. As proof of my inadequate representation, he offered the judge's verdict, rendering him guilty. The case was thrown out quickly. He jumped through all these legal hoops. This man was so sure. And yet, he shouldn't have been. Story 5. I'm a prosecutor, so I don't get hired to represent anyone. I work for the government, but I do have discretion over how the prosecution progresses. For example, deciding to proceed, deciding what to offer in the event of a plea bargain, deciding to withdraw the charges, etc. I had a case a few months ago where a man was charged with shoplifting. Turned out he was 70 years old, had no criminal record, and had shoplifted a sandwich which he politely ate in the store. He honestly thought he had paid for it. I was so angry that he was ever charged in the first place. When I saw him in court, he was absolutely terrified. I withdrew the charges and wished him well. I have no idea how it progressed that far. Story 6. Let me preface this. I had heard about the guy I'm going to mention below before I had actually met him. I thought this was an urban legend, until he came into my office one day. A guy in his late 50s/early 60s comes into the lobby area of my office and starts a commotion that freaks out the receptionist. I was the closest attorney to the lobby, so I go out and talk to the guy. He was clearly mentally disturbed and presented the following story. Someone had implanted a device in his brain that was controlling his behavior. He believed it was being controlled by Baskin-Robbins and a former mayor of Detroit. He believed they were forcing him to do random things like going to the bars to drink, taking the wrong turn when driving, forcing him to retire from his job, and a lot of other very intricate things. After asking him if he had seen any doctors regarding the implant, he got really upset and said that he thought the doctors were in on it as well. After telling him I couldn't help him and suggesting he find some new doctors, he asked me if I knew any lawyers who were specialized in this kind of case. I often wonder if the lawyer I referred him to was actually able to help him. Nah, hate to say it, OP, I don't think this guy needs a lawyer at all. He needs something, but it's not law advice. Story 7. I'm in immigration, so most of my stupid cases involve people trying to con the system or forgot to tell us material information. One lady stood out though. She was referred to us as a pro bono case. She was filing for asylum based on the fact that she's a Chinese national and also a devout Christian. If she was sent back, she would be persecuted based on religious reasons. So nothing weird up to this point. She provided me with statements about how she and her family were harassed by the local police and how certain members of her congregation were arrested. So I'm looking at the statements and the names and places sound familiar. Sure enough, a quick Googling showed that this was one of the bot stories. Essentially, what happens is there are people on the internet who sell these fake packages of documents and stories for a successful asylum case. From what I've heard, it is usually a real case that was successful, and someone got a hold of the supporting documents and started mass producing them and selling them. I'm guessing you're supposed to change the names from the original, but this lady didn't. Another red flag was the fact that in her supporting documents, the witnesses kept referring to her as male. At first, I thought the English translation had typos, but yeah, same thing in the original Chinese ones. I always thought it was more of an urban legend amongst immigration lawyers. Needless to say, I did not take her case. I don't think you get persecuted for being Christian in many places in China. In fact, I thought that Christianity was pretty popular in China, actually. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I really did think it. Anyway, buying documents to try to make an asylum case is kind of wild. Honestly, not the worst strategy, but also probably not the best to use a case that's already succeeded and just not even change the names. That seems like a bit of a lapse in judgment. Story 8. I had a teacher that worked for a major video game publisher, one of the top 10 ones. He told me that when people try to sue them for small amounts due to some game being bad, they would just pay whatever the person wanted. It was cheaper than dealing with the country's terrible justice system. Except one day a guy sued them because a game was bad. He was a law student, self-representing, and tried to throw the book at the company. They decided to make an exception for this guy. They instead threw the book back at him. The lawsuit kept escalating until both sides wasted a lot of time and money. Then, as a final stroke, they offered to settle in front of a judge. There, in front of the judge, they put the price of the game on the table in cash and told the guy to just take it and stop bothering them. The judge thought it was very fair and told the guy that if he refused that settlement, he would be fined. The guy was very unhappy. He expended like $5,000 US in bureaucracy and airplane fares to get 60 USD. I'm just gonna say, I know some gamers that would consider that an absolute win. They'd be like, yeah, I proved my point. I got that company good. Story 9. I worked as a receptionist at a small personal injury firm and was the first line of defense against the more outlandish cases. One of the most ridiculous calls I took involved a woman wanting to sue her cat's veterinarian for malpractice because her cat scratched her, which in turn supposedly caused her liver to fail and a slew of other health problems to arise. She believed the vet was at fault because she was convinced the cat was carrying some obscure disease and the vet had failed to catch it. It was my second day on the job, so I put her through to an attorney, not yet knowing what else to do with such a ridiculous situation. She got a firm, "Sorry, can't help you," from our office. In part because we don't do malpractice, veterinary or otherwise, but also because she sounded like a one-way ticket to Crazy Town. Edit. As some have pointed out, the woman may actually have cat scratch fever, which could in theory lead to a legitimate claim. However, when she called, she presented it as, I got sick and then someone told me it was from my cat. My vet never told me my cat was sick. Can I sue him for malpractice? And apparently vets do not regularly test for cat scratch fever unless you bring your cat in for certain symptoms. This was clearly an I see a chance for a cash payout situation. We would get calls like that all the time with both bizarre and banal stories behind them. Either way, she would have needed someone more specialized than the firm I worked for, which primarily handled car accidents and zero cats. Story 10. Worked as IT for a family law firm. One day, a lady comes in asking to have an attorney look at her divorce. She goes in with the lawyer and tells him that she wants the divorce on the grounds that he was beating her. The attorney explained that he would be willing to do it, but advised that because the marriage was so short, just a few months, the easiest way to get a divorce and get away from her abuser was just to file a no-fault and get it over with. She starts yelling, throwing things at and hitting him. Mind you, he's an older guy in his late 60s at this point. She tells him that if she could get 4 other divorces from him, then she could do it a 5th time. She had married and divorced the same guy 4 times before this. The firm didn't take the case, but our sister firm, what we called the firm our firm split off of, did take the guy's case. Turns out she had been the abusive one, basically holding him and their kids hostage, with threats of telling the police that he was touching the kids and beating her. I feel like after the 3rd or 4th divorce, they gotta start looking at that like, what's going on here? Something is up. That being said, though, it is a scary example at how some people can get away with abuse. Male or female, but it's easier to get away with it in this kind of way as a woman, I think. The legal system and people in general just don't seem to really believe male abuse victims a whole lot. So this super sucks, but I'm glad that it got found out at the very least. I hope the kids and the husband are doing better now. Story 11. Sometimes you have no choice but to take it. I represented a guy who sold and leased cars. A woman worked for a company that let her drive a company van to work as part of a carpool effort. She'd keep the van at home and picked up fellow workers to go to work and then bring them back to their homes. One day, going to work, she was stopped at a stoplight. Some guy didn't stop in time and bumped into the van. She got out to look. She and the other guy agreed. No damage. So they each went on their ways. Later, a woman who was a passenger decided/discovered she was injured. Went to a lawyer. The lawyer sued the company, the driver, and every passenger in the van. The lawyer deposed each passenger, got the name of their auto insurance company, sent a demand letter for coverage. One of the passengers said, I don't have a car, but my sister does. So they sued the sister. She said, I don't have insurance because I leased the car and they provide insurance. So the lawyer sued my client and sent a demand letter for insurance coverage. Story 12. The poor pregnant woman hit by an on-duty cop case. Worked in an auto insurance defense firm in, you guessed it, Florida, about a decade ago, representing a despicable insurance company against despicable chiropractors in PIP cases. Personal injury protection, like the least, most basic insurance you need to legally get your car tabs renewed in FL. It's a crap show, $10,000 max coverage. Ambulance chasers get folks to go to the chiro they recommend. Chiro runs up $9,999 of treatment. They say, congrats, you're cured. Clients enjoy free massages. Can't fault them. But this is between the chiros and the insurance company. Chiro submits bill. Insurance company balks. Chiro sues. There are thousands of these cases out there at any given time. By statute, if they recovered any money, chiros get attorney fees. So plaintiffs' attorneys love this. Insurance company calls in the records, does a medical check, brings in dueling expert witnesses, etc. Drops bills by a couple grand. At the cost of a couple grand, Kairos get paid and free attorney payments. And the whole time they wait through this, they get 11% interest on the bill. That's right. These things are like 11% interest bonds. Kairos make money. Plaintiff and defense attorneys also make money. Medical experts make crap tons of money doing basically nothing. Insurance company just passes the cost on to you. The whole thing is stupid, but if you want experience doing lots and lots of civil litigation defense, well, as a young attorney. Anyhow, sometimes the insurance company would just want to go to trial to try and prove a point or create precedent in their favor. Or just hassle opposing counsel. Blow $40,000 fighting a bill that should be settled to $3 to $6K. One such case was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Insured was a poor young woman of color. Driving in a slummier suburb, she pulled up to a four-way stop. At the stop, she was rear-ended in a low-speed collision by an on-duty police officer in his patrol car. Insured is 9 months pregnant. Cop rightly checks on her and calls an ambulance. She hit the steering column, so they go to the hospital to make sure that she and the baby are okay, and they are, fortunately. Gives birth later on, no problem. Kid and mom are fine. But she goes to a chiro after the accident and runs up the usual $10K. Company wants us to go to trial on this one under the argument of she wasn't hurt in the accident, she just wanted post-childbirth massages. We are flabbergasted. So you want us to A, subpoena this poor, literally, single mother, put her on the stand and somehow get her to say that she wasn't hurt, she just had woman pains, and B, subpoena the police officer who hit her and get him to say that taking her to the hospital to check up on her being 9 months pregnant was an unnecessary overreaction due to the low speed of the accident? A cop covering his butt? Do you have any idea what will look like to the jury? After like a week of this, they finally agreed to settle. I quit shortly thereafter. Now, I own a brewery because being a lawyer sucks. Story 13. A master's student was repeatedly attacked by his neighbor's dog, a pit bull. The third time it attacked him, he had to get 6 stitches. He called the cops and they told him to call animal control. He called animal control and they told him they could only hold the dog for 12 days. Then they have to give it back. So the 4th time it attacked him, he broke its teeth and ribs and then dragged the dog to the neighbor's house, opened the door, and threw it inside. Very stupid on his part. When the cops arrived, the dog's owner and her roommate accused him of attacking the dog for some stupid reason. He spent 1 night in jail for criminal mischief, a Class C misdemeanor. Since he had police reports, animal control reports, pictures of his injuries, and hospital bills, his case was strong and we decided to take it. However, the new DA, in an attempt to further her career, tried to bump his case up to a felony. The judge threw the case out immediately and gave the guy an expunction. Story 14. I hand out a lot of business cards, so they inevitably end up in the hands of some questionable people. Eventually, they found their way into the hands of Mr. Bob. That's not his real name, obviously. Mr. Bob was a very unique fellow. He approached me inquiring about suing the federal government, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the Secretary of State, the entirety of Congress, and the President. This obviously put me on guard due to the ridiculousness of his request. But instead of throwing him out the door, I decided to ask why he wanted to sue the aforementioned parties. He replied that the government had kidnapped him and performed all sorts of painful experiments on him. He claimed that the government was working with the reptilians to pursue some generic evil plot against humanity as a whole. He claimed that the only reason he managed to escape was that there was a reptilian double agent who managed to spring him from his cell, and after laying low for a few years, he came to me for help. At that point, I was done with the conversation. I asked him to wait out in the lobby while I called the local police department to make sure this guy hadn't escaped from prison or some insane asylum. He hadn't. After I got off the phone, I went back over to him and told him that if the government officials were working under the reptilians, then that would mean they would have revoked their American citizenship and thus were only subject to intergalactic law. Since I only specialize in the American law practice, I couldn't help him. He seemed really disappointed, but he left without making any fuss. Yeah, that was both the best and worst day of my career. Makes for an interesting story for parties, though. Story 15. Mostly just really stupid clients, but it's not always obvious until they become your clients. I did have a guy call me and meet me at a bar. He didn't sound nuts on the phone because he wanted me to sue his ex-wife, who he was already suing, sue the opposing counsel, the judge for putting his children in danger by giving ex-wife custody, his church for kicking him out since his ex got a restraining order, his bank for giving his ex-wife access to their joint accounts, which she drained, his cell phone company for not letting him cancel her number before the divorce decree was finalized, and the doctor for diagnosing him a paranoid schizophrenic because they were all colluding together to destroy his life. Oh, and the best part is that he wanted me to take on all this work for contingency only, saying, "There's a lot of meat on these bones, we can go halfsies on whatever you win." I remember specifically that he said, "Go halfsies." I hope it's needless to say, I did not take this client on. I feel like at some point when you're racking all these charges up in your head, you gotta think and be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. All these people can't possibly be against me, right? That's just not statistically likely. That is really rough though. He was probably going through some serious mental stresses, I guess. So I feel for the guy, and it sucks because it probably onset some sort of mental condition, if not psychosis, from the sounds of it. So I hope he's doing all right, but I also hope he realized that not all of that is possible. The suing, I mean. Anyway, this was an exciting video for sure. Lots of pretty stupid cases and lots of pretty interesting characters. So I hope you enjoyed watching or listening, and I also hope you have a wonderful day or a night wherever you are. I will see you in the next one.